Maybe you read about it in the newspaper. About a month ago, the Texas State Board of Education made a required book list for every grade in the state. Rabbi Geffen is no longer hailing from the state of Texas. That means, should this list be passed, that wherever you went to school, you would have the same reading list as kids your age all over the state. Teachers would have no choice. There are familiar books on these lists, things that I no doubt many, if not all of us in this room would affirm and say, oh yeah, that makes sense, including, by the way, the Diary of Anne Frank in high school and lots of others. Additionally, though, on the lists are scriptural readings from what Christians would call the New and Old Testament. We would call the Tanakh, or Hebrew Bible, and for them, the New Testament. In other words, biblical texts are intended to become part of a new state-mandated reading curriculum throughout the entire state of Texas. Now, these lists are not finalized, as evidenced by my Google searches looking to see what's on all of them. I couldn't find all. The press reports they're still in conversation and they wouldn't go into effect for a few years. But the authors and the reporters who wrote about it described that pretty much the authors of most of the sources on these lists are pretty much white and male and don't reflect the diversity of either the state of Texas or, for that matter, the entire United States. I'd say this is problematic. The concept of a state-mandated curriculum that gives teachers no choice to select works that reflect their students, their particular interests or expertise, or what's going on in the world, I'd say that's problematic too. Additionally, what is particularly disturbing about these lists, no surprise, I'm talking about it tonight, is the inclusion of biblical passages, which some who have looked at the list say particularly reflect an evangelical Christian version of the texts. Great for them, but that's not everyone's cup of tea or faith. And so while, yes, the Bible and other religious scriptures are, for many of us, literature, and have times and places to be studied, even perhaps in a secular English class, as literature, to mandate scriptural readings of any sort is deeply problematic. To do so is to mandate a particular form of religion, which last I heard violates the First Amendment of the Constitution. We read in the First Amendment, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. I know we could get into this as not Congress, but let's not right now. In other words, a particular religion cannot be established and imposed on the country or its citizens. So bringing Christian scripture to the Texas public schools as required reading seems to be problematic, as it imposes a particular religion. So let's be clear. I am opposed to mandated reading lists for any state. I think teachers should have some say. I mean, there might be specific texts that should be included. And I'm really opposed to requiring biblical literature being read in any state in secular schools. I join with my rabbinic colleagues of the Central Conference of American Rabbis, our rabbinic organization, whose statement issued last week declares, and I quote, that the requirement represents a state establishment of religion, which is a gross violation of the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment to the United States Constitution. So that's the backdrop. I'm opposed. That being said, I've been thinking about this. I've been mulling it over and thought, couldn't help but consider, well, what if Jewish texts were on the list? I know you can say what Christians call the Old Testament is our text, but like, what if we were putting the texts on the list? I mean, for as much as these texts shouldn't be required, it got me thinking, if I was going to require Tanakh or Hebrew Bible texts to be read by high school students, forget the younger grades for now, throughout the country, no matter their background, what would they be? Again, I'm not looking to impose, but it got me thinking, a little intellectual exercise. Another way to think about this might be, what do I think, or we think, are the key Hebrew texts or Hebrew scriptural texts for all time? I've been thinking about this. I've had some time healing from arm surgery. I've had a lot of time to think. And then I consulted with a minion or so of rabbis and cantors. Pretty much anyone who's worked at North Shore Congregation Israel in the last decade, I want you to know, even if they've moved out of state, and a few others. I did a little polling, and interestingly, there's a lot of agreement. So I started to consider what are the values we as Jews would want to share with others if we were sharing our text. So I'm going to give you what is my short list, as consulted with my colleagues, for the world at this moment. That doesn't mean these are better or worse texts. It doesn't mean I might not change my mind tomorrow. But where the world is right now, looking at our Hebrew Bible, that is Torah, prophets, and writings, I'll share with you some teachings. And those of you who want to study any of these texts a little more in depth, join me tomorrow morning in the Minyan, because that's what we're going to study. I'm going to refer to things now. The first is Genesis. In Genesis chapter 1, we are taught that each of us is created in the image of God. So if you're created in the image of God, what does that mandate you to do? Our rabbis teach that mandates you to look at others as they too are created in God's image and treat them with respect. We jump up to Genesis 18 and Exodus 22, both of which speak to welcome in some way. Genesis 18 is about Abraham welcoming the guests to his tent. These are strangers. He doesn't know who they are. He welcomes them in. Imagine greeting people you don't know, welcoming them in, offering the best of what you've got. We get to Exodus 22, we get to don't oppress a stranger. So not only should we welcome people, but we shouldn't treat them badly. Leviticus 19, as many of you know, one of my favorite passages of Torah, also called the Holiness Code or Kedoshim, starts out with, "Be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy." So if we are to be holy, we are to act like God. That's a pretty high mandate. Not sure we ever get there, but our role, our responsibility is to keep trying. And later in that chapter is the verse that you all know. It used to hang over there on that wall before we read to this room. V'ahavta l'rayecha kamocha. Love your neighbor as yourself. As well, in Leviticus 19, we have lots of texts that speak to our responsibility to those in need. Don't put a stumbling block before the blind. Don't insult the deaf. Don't ill-treat the widow or the orphan, those who don't have resources. And leave the corners of your field for the poor and the stranger. Those verses, coupled with Isaiah 58, which you may remember is the Haftarah on Yom Kippur, afternoon, morning, share your bread with the hungry. Let the oppressed go free. Again, we have responsibility in our world to take advantage, to reach out to help others, particularly those who are in need. Then if we jumped up to another text, I know someone's waiting for me to say the 10 Commandments, but I didn't include all 10, I gotta say. Include 2. The first commandment says, I, the Lord your God, have brought you out of the land of Egypt. Those of you in adult B'nai Mitzvah class know I often refer to that as the uncommandment. It doesn't command, but it implies responsibility. God said, I did something for you, implicit, we got to do something back. There's covenant, relationship. Inherent in relationship, if it's a good one, is responsibility. And then if we jump up to Exodus, a little further to verse 8, it says, remember the Sabbath. Now, I would say key for people understanding who we are as Jews is indeed understanding that we have a Sabbath, that we are to remember, that harkens us back to creation, and also just the word zachor. Throughout Torah, how many times are we told to remember? Remember our history, remember our past, remember the lessons, remember the bad and the good, and act informed by that. Then we jump up to Deuteronomy. You all know this next passage. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. And then into V'ahavta. We are to affirm God. And even if you're not sure who or what God is, or you really doubt it, again, it's to look around and recognize that it's not all in our human hands. And if we act with love of God, or whatever you want to call that thing you're not sure of, that we need to act in responsibility with others and to lift ourselves higher. A little further up in Deuteronomy 16, justice, justice, you shall pursue. When our tradition says pursue, it literally means I'm not going to run now, I'll trip. But we need to run after something. And we are taught there, and then in Psalm 34, we are supposed to pursue peace too. So not only should we run after justice, but we should seek peace and pursue it. Look for how we can make peace at home and then run after it. Make it happen. Along with that is a text from early in Isaiah that says, Lo yistagoy al goy cherev, lo yimadu od milchama. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation. Neither shall they study war anymore. Deuteronomy 30:19, actually right on the ark over behind my head, choose life. Uvacharta v'chayim. Yes, choose physical life, choose spiritual life, choose life-affirming decisions in our words and our actions. And one more in Proverbs, the power of the tongue of life and death is in the power of the tongue. We can create life, we can take life with our words. There's so much here. These are but a few. Truly, this is, as you recognize, I'm sure, an ethical list that doesn't really get into our rituals, it doesn't get into our people, our role models. But if it's anything, it is a message of responsibility, of humility, of respect and community. Messages which I believe and would hope transcend faith boundaries if we're sharing them outside of our own people. We will study these texts tomorrow morning in Minyan at 9:30. You're welcome to join us if you want to consider them even more. For now, I leave you with my last of our NSCI top texts that is writ large on the sanctuary wall. It has been told you, people, what is good and what God demands of you, to do justice, to love goodness, and to walk humbly with your God. Micah teaches us we need to live with justice, goodness, and walk with humility. May we do just that. Shabbat shalom.